Hello everyone, this is Ray Warda, Outreach and Marketing Director with BLB Resources. I am glad you are tuning in today to watch our webcast on this special webcast that we have titled Good Neighbor Next Door, where we will talk strictly about the Good Neighbor Next Door program, some of its eligibility requirements and stipulations, and we'll also go through the Q&A. And today's webcast, I also got a special guest by the name of CJ Stillwell. CJ is our project manager for the 5S region, which covers the states of California and Hawaii. CJ, welcome aboard. I know I see you on my screen. I hope everybody does as well.
All right, hi everybody.
So the reason I put CJ on this webcast with me was mainly because he's not only awesome, but he is really a wealth of knowledge, especially with this special programs that we have. For example, this Good Neighbor Next Door program and other things that I myself sometimes go to CJ when I need those special things, or if I want to make sure about certain things about HUD Homes and HUD programs. So I'm glad that he is actually joining in with me on this webcast, so that way we can get this all our questions answered, and we're going to go through special Q&As during our presentation as well, so that way sometimes these special Q&As that will answer your questions that may not be out there and readily available to you. So let's first start with what actually the Good Neighbor Next Door program is about, and who's eligible for these types of homes. Okay. The Good Neighbor Next Door program, which also you'll see in acronyms called, named specifically GNND, these properties are they're in designated revitalized areas that are assigned to what's called a lottery program. So when you go to visit on HUDHomestore.com to check out and find out if there are any certain properties that are eligible for Good Neighbor Next Door, they will be labeled as a lottery program, meaning that the first 7 days of the list period that is listed on HUDHomestore.com, those 7 days are particularly for either government entities or eligibility requirements for Good Neighbor Next Door or nonprofits. And I'll show you a particular listing after I talk about exactly what Good Neighbor Next Door is, so that way you can have an idea of where to find Good Neighbor Next Door properties and how do you know if they're, of course, eligible, and kind of give you an example. Okay, so they're listed and sold exclusively through the HUDHomestore.com website, and they are not found in the MLS. So please keep in mind that it's not something that if you're an agent going on the MLS, you will not find these particular homes because, like I said, the first 7 days, these are special homes that are only listed on HUDHomestore.com. And when you are interested in submitting bids on these type of homes through HUDHomestore.com, you will have to submit full priced offers, because everybody pretty much bids the same amount, which is the full priced offer. But once we receive all those bids, it's technically a lottery at that point on who becomes the winner, because all the bids are exactly the same. There's nobody that's bidding higher or lower. That's why it's called a lottery program. Now, HUD does not pay any closing costs or commissions for these properties, so you got to keep in mind, and that's one of the main reasons why agents will not see these particular properties on the MLS, because there is no commission that's paid to the listing agent nor the selling agent. So if you are a selling agent out there that is trying to sell a Good Neighbor Next Door eligible property, you will have to make a strict, separate, negotiated commission agreement between you and the buyer. Well, with the Good Neighbor Next Door program, the whole point of the program is there are 4 types of industries, employment industries. So if your buyer belongs into any of these 4 employment industries, they will receive a 50% discount on the home. And 50% is a huge amount, so the buyers will be willing to pay or negotiate a agreement with you, a commission agreement, to find these homes and get into the contract and represent them as your real estate professional, and pay you the certain whatever negotiated amount that you negotiate with a particular buyer. Now, the specific industries that are for this particular program are exactly for teachers, emergency medical techs, firefighters, and law enforcement. So if your buyer is employed with one of those four industries, they are eligible to receive, or actually they may be eligible to receive the 50% discount on these types of homes. And of course, these are homes that are designated in revitalized areas. I'm going to show you exactly where to find these homes and how to search on HUDHomestore.com for these types of homes. Especially if you're a buyer watching this right now, you really want to go through this process to find if we have any eligible properties for these types of homes. CJ, do you have anything to add on that besides what I spoke about?
The one thing I would add is that for revitalization areas, a lot of questions come up as far as how does HUD determine the revitalization area. Unfortunately, we don't provide that information. It's not handled by us. HUD does have a public website, which is the single family locator, where you can go on and locate what revitalization areas HUD has designated. Sometimes a property will never pop up in your particular area. Generally, these are distressed neighborhoods that they're trying to revitalize. But that information is public. You can look it up.
I appreciate the added verbiage there, because it's definitely, a lot of people think that there's more of these homes that should be allowed because they have their own means of what they call revitalized areas, but HUD looks at it a different way, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So let me go ahead and show you exactly, very short and brief, on how to get through finding a HUD home and if it's available. So I'm going on HUDHomestore.com, which is, of course, let's see, if we type in, and I'm just going to do this so that way you can see this, homestore.com. Once we get to the HUDHomestore.com website, in order to search for the Good Neighbor Next Door properties, the eligible properties that are currently actively listed, and keep in mind these change on a daily basis, so it's always good to come to the site on a daily basis to find out if there are any homes available. The easiest way is this map right here. So all you would do is when you come to the home store, HUDHomestore.com site here, you click on right here where it says Good Neighbor Next Door. Once you click on that, that highlights the map now. So all of these highlighted states that you see in darker blue, that means that those particular states currently have active property or properties that have Good Neighbor Next Door eligible properties in them. So for example, I'll click on the state Oregon, because that's pretty much the only highlighted state that we have in the West Coast that has any Good Neighbor Next Door. And once you click on the state, it'll show you all of the properties in that particular state that have Good Neighbor Next Door property eligibility. So which is this particular property right here. And as you can see, this is what I mean by lottery. It's every Good Neighbor Next Door property will have lottery. And if you hover your mouse over the question mark, it'll tell you another means of finding out if it is a Good Neighbor Next Door eligible property. It'll say, once you hover your mouse over there, it'll say if it's eligible for Good Neighbor Next Door participants, as you see it right there. Okay. Now, another way to search for it, let's go back here. Let's say I didn't use this map right here and I wanted to just search under this area right here where it says search properties. Let's say I'm in a state of Oregon. I'm going to use that as an example. And I click on OR, and then the key area where you want to look is buyer type right here. Once you see this, you have to click on it and click on Good Neighbor Next Door. This will bring up all of the properties under that buyer type. Good Neighbor Next Door, and you click on search, and boom, there you have it. There's that one property that came up. It comes up right there again. So those are the two ways of searching for a HUD home. And I would highly encourage you to do that, because that's pretty much where you will find these eligible properties when it comes to finding a Good Neighbor Next Door property. So let's talk about these four segments of industries that a particular buyer may be eligible to get a 50% discount with. Okay, so let's say your buyer is an officer. These are defined as an individual who is fully employed by a federal or state or county or municipal government and is sworn to uphold and make arrests for violations of federal, state, county, and municipal law. Okay, they must have 24 hours, 7 days a week arrest authority and the property must be located no more than 1 hour from the station that they are reporting to. Okay, so with that said, I'd like to go through a small Q&A, and CJ is going to help me out with this. Okay, so the first question comes up that is very popular is, I'm currently in the academy, do I qualify? So CJ, if somebody's in the academy, would they qualify through the Good Neighbor Next Door?
No, they would not. They would actually have to complete the academy and be sworn in as an officer before they would be able to even place a bid. Sometimes people ask, I'm currently in the academy, but by the time the property closes, I'll have graduated. Do I qualify? Unfortunately, no. They have to qualify at the time they're placing the bid and that bid is awarded. So officers that are currently in training and have not fully been sworn in yet and received all the completed training do not qualify.
Thank you for providing that information. Another question regarding officers that comes up often is, it says, I work in a prison and have authority over inmates while on duty. Do I qualify? CJ?
Right, that tends to be a tricky one. A lot of people think, I am an officer in the jail, so I should qualify. Unfortunately, the problem is their jurisdiction is within the jail only, and only while on duty. So HUD released a statement a couple years ago, several years ago actually, that said, in particular, Bureau of Prison employees don't qualify because of that guideline, because they are only they only have that ability to arrest while on duty and to those inmates. So generally speaking, it doesn't fit the spirit of the program. A lot of times you'll hear us talk about the spirit of the program and what that means. So the spirit would be an officer that not only has jurisdiction within a jail, but outside and 24/7, not just while on duty.
So the key answer to that is the 24/7, and they have jurisdiction that's outside of the inmates that they actually monitor during the daytime hours. Or
Absolutely.
Whatever it is. Okay. Another question for officers. It states, I work for the CIA, FBI, or DHS. Can I qualify? How about that?
That's a good question. Yes, those officers do qualify. We don't get very many of them, but I think it might be because the public does not understand that those particular officers do qualify. So yes, CIA, FBI, DHS can qualify for the program as long as the station they report to, that main station, is no more than an hour away from the property. Obviously, we don't want someone out of state who's an officer trying to purchase within the state. That doesn't necessarily fit the spirit of the program.
So I hear the spirit of the program quite often. So these things may vary, and it just depends really what it's really meant for, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Awesome. Let's move on to teachers and kind of define what a teacher is and what HUD considers a teacher in this program. And a teacher is pretty much defined as an individual that's employed full-time by a state accredited public school or private school as a classroom teacher in the grades pre-K through 12, and that this agency serves students from the school district or, in case of a private school, from the area that is serving the property address. I know that's a mouthful, but we'll get into some Q&As that will help us with this particular point right there. So, and it also, you want to keep in mind that it must be a brick and mortar school, and online schools do not qualify, unfortunately. So let's talk about some Q&As that come up with schools that are, or with this program that relates to teachers. So Q&A, first question, CJ, comes up. It says, my school is not in the district where the property is located, but it does service students from that district. Do I qualify?
Yeah, that's an extremely common one. So, for instance, maybe someone is working in the Long Beach Unified School District, reporting to one of those schools as a teacher, but they want to purchase a property in the Los Angeles Unified School District. Maybe that property is in LA. Do they qualify? A lot of times they ask, we may service students, meaning students from Long Beach can attend that school that they work at, or vice versa. And do they qualify? Unfortunately, no. They have to be servicing students within the area as their typical course of business. Students can apply to go to school outside of their districts. Those applications are not always approved. And generally speaking, it's a very, very small percentage that are approved. So it doesn't, again, fit the spirit of the program. They want teachers within the community, living in the community.
That's good to know. Another question that comes in quite often is, I work in the front office or part of the administration staff. Do I qualify?
Yeah, that goes back to the standard rule that it has to be a classroom teacher, grades K through 12. So someone in the front office answering phones or doing scheduling or counselors and things like that don't qualify. Spirit of the program looks at a classroom teacher, grades K through 12.
And I tell you one thing about teachers, they deserve to get paid more. That's all I have to say. Okay, another one, a lot of teachers sometimes, before they become full-time teachers, they're substitute teachers. So as a substitute teacher, do they qualify?
No. Generally speaking, they do not qualify. We are looking for full-time classroom teachers that are fully credentialed. I know that some substitutes are fully credentialed, but they're substitutes. They bounce around. They might not report to any one particular school. They don't necessarily work full-time, so that doesn't fit the guidelines. Has to be a full-time, fully employed teacher in the classroom.
Excellent, that makes sense. And the last question for teachers that comes up quite often, it says, actually no, there's two more questions. One of them, it says, I work for a private school. Do I qualify?
Private schools can qualify. Even charter schools can qualify. The general rule there is that obviously private schools don't have typical districts, but we're dealing with driving time. So it's kind of like the officers in that if you're working for a private school, the rule is that you should be within 1 hour of the property.
Okay. And then the last question, and this has to do with, of course, the type of teacher. PE, physical ed teacher, do those qualify? Do those type of teachers qualify?
PE teachers qualify. Sometimes people take that classroom thing very
Yeah.
literal, where I have to be in a room. But no, PE teachers, I mean, their classroom is outside, but it's still part of that school. So PE teachers, special ed teachers, things like that, they do qualify.
Okay. Let's move on to the next segment, which is the emergency medical techs, the EMTs. These particular eligible applicants are defined as individuals who are employed full-time as an emergency medical technical by an emergency medical service responder unit of a federal, state, or general local government or an Indian tribal government serving the property address. So privatized EMTs do not qualify. CJ, you want to add anything to that? I know that was kind of a mouthful, but...
Yeah, the big thing on that page is that privatized EMTs don't qualify. Unfortunately, some cities do outsource that, and because of that, your check might not come from the city or the state or the county. It comes from, ABC Emergency. If that's the case, that does not fit the guidelines of the program. You have to be employed by the local municipality, not by a third-party outsourcer.
Okay, so since emergency medical techs and firefighters are pretty closely related in their industry, I'm going to skip the question and answer on the emergency medical techs and go directly to the firefighters. And after the firefighters, we'll have a couple of questions that are related to both the EMTs and firefighters. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay, so the firefighters, they're defined as an individual who is employed full-time as a firefighter by a fire department of a federal, state, or general local government, or an Indian tribal government servicing the property address. So voluntary or part-time firefighters do not qualify, which I think is pretty important there because there's a lot of firefighters before they become full-time. they do their voluntary time and their part-time. Anything you want to add to that, CJ?
No, you covered it. Voluntary and part-time do not qualify.
Okay, so let's go with the Q&As. I only have a couple of them on that that are in regards to firefighters and EMTs. So here's the first one, CJ. It says, my station does not regularly service the area where the home is located. However, we do have a city agreement for emergencies. Do I qualify?
And so that one is one that comes up quite often, where the station that firefighter reports to does not service the area where the home is located in their typical course of business. However, there are a lot of times where cities have agreements with one another that if major emergencies come up, they can call on the services of those other cities to come in and help. So those agreements, a lot of times the firefighters reference in saying we have an agreement, a mutual agreement with the next city over. So we do service them, but only in emergencies. So do I qualify if that's the case? Unfortunately, no, that doesn't fit the guidelines. They have to, during the regular course of business, day in and day out, not just in those major emergencies, service the area where the property is located.
That's great to know. Thank you. I know we're learning a lot, and this is a great segment, especially with the Q&As, and it was purposefully done where we added some of these Q&As that are general questions that we get a lot, and that's why we wanted to do this webcast, mainly to go, of course, and try to answer the questions that you probably already have.
Obviously, this is what we're following as of right now. Some of the things that we're going over are not in the GNND documents that buyers sign. So a lot of times they come to us asking questions on that. But that's why we reference the spirit of the program, and it's a HUD program, therefore it's up to HUD's interpretation of that program. Now, as new information comes out and employment evolves and positions change, so too can HUD's interpretation of that, either to potentially include more people into the program or possibly exclude certain things. So what we're saying is good for right now and in the near future, but as things change, we'll evolve and we'll, I'm sure, post that information.
Absolutely. Another question that comes up for firefighters and EMTs, it says, my station is located at an airport, military base, or such as, etc. Do I qualify?
Yeah, that's another tricky one. It's kind of like the Bureau of Prisons, where firefighters reporting to fire stations on bases like that or at airports, they only service the base. They only service the airport. Again, they might have one of those mutual agreements where in major emergencies, they can go out and service that other city, but generally speaking, they only service that base. So they would not be servicing where the home is located. They would only be isolated to the base or the airport, so they would not qualify, unfortunately.
These were great. This is a great part of the whole webcast, is going through these question and answers. And of course, you might ask, okay, what's all behind this whole Good Neighbor Next Door? How could we just get a 50% discount if we qualify and are eligible? Well, there are some participation and stipulation requirements and stipulations that you would want to know, and I'm going to go through them right now before we end it off with just some general questions. But for example, on participation and stipulations, the buyer must meet HUD's eligibility requirements, which are the requirements that we set forth in our previous which was our segment about the different Q&As about qualifying and being eligible as a particular teacher, EMT, law enforcement, or firefighter. So first, that's the first part, is you have to qualify based on those requirements. Then a buyer has to sign a second mortgage and a note for the discounted amount of the list price. So for example, if you're purchasing a home that is listed at $200,000 and you're bidding as a Good Neighbor Next Door eligible person that may be eligible, you're bidding $200,000. Well, what happens is once we accept your bid and you won the lottery on that particular bid, after the close of escrow, what happens is that $200,000, you get a 50% discount. That 50% you're going to get either you're going to have to pay cash for, or you're going to have to get a loan in. The other 50%, it's what's called a silent second mortgage. That's what happens to it. So it's actually why they call it as a silent, because it's there as a second mortgage, okay, but there is no payments made on it, and there's deferred interest. So as long as you are staying in that property as your primary residence for the first 3 years of that particular property, then after the 3 years, that silent second disappears. So you have to be in that property for at least 3 years. Now, let's just say if things change after a year and a half and you move, or you're planning to sell, or something happens, well, at that point, you're going to have to pay the prorated difference of that particular loan. So whatever the loan is for that particular time that you haven't used, or that's still remaining, that's where they'll prorate that amount, and then you'll have to pay that particular amount. Am I on the right ballpark there, CJ, with that?
Yes.
Okay. So as it states, no interest payments are required on a silent second for the first 3 years of occupancy. Of course, there's additional addenda that is required for these sales that you'll have to sign. One of the things is that, of course, neither the buyer nor his or her spouse may have owned any residential property during the year prior to the date of submitting a bid on a home that's intended for purchase. Neither the buyer nor his or her spouse may have ever purchased another home under the Good Neighbor Next Door sales program. So technically, it's only a one-time thing that if you're under a Good Neighbor Next Door eligible participant, where you can utilize this particular program and get the 50% discount. CJ, anything you want to add with that?
Yeah, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so choose that property wisely.
So with that being said, let's go through some general questions that we get regards to these types of eligibility requirements. And the first question, CJ, that comes up often is, does the pre-approval need to list the full purchase price or the discounted sales price? Which is a good question.
All right. The pre-approval for the loan must be for the total purchase price. And because, as you mentioned, there's that silent second that's going to be there. So they actually have to qualify for the full amount, not just the 50%. So that pre-approval should show that they've qualified for the full amount.
And that's a great point, because a lot of people think that they have to qualify only for that 50% portion. But of course, because they have that 3-year stipulation and you may be liable for the full amount, they want to make sure that you are going to be able to pay that amount.
Right.
Okay, another question that comes up, it says, I own a timeshare in Hawaii. Do I qualify? Timeshare, that's a good question.
Yeah, timeshares aren't something that someone would really think about as far as owning real property. However, there are two different types of timeshares. One where they actually show as an owner on title, and the other one where they don't. So it really comes down to what type of timeshare is it. If it's one that actually shows that you have an ownership in that real property for that land, then you would not qualify. That shows that you actually own property. If it's one where it's just a random timeshare, they don't record that you're an owner, then yes, you would qualify.
You know, I just had to write that down because I didn't know about the timeshare and the ownership, because you're right, timeshares can be kind of tricky. They can, have you on title, and some of them don't. So it is important to really distinguish between the two, and I'm glad we came up with that particular question, because that helped me out too. So thank you, CJ.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a timeshare, you might want to check to see what type of ownership it is before bidding on a GNND property.
Great to know. Another question that comes up, it says, I'm on a deed for my parents' house or someone else, but I do not live there. Do I qualify?
Right. This happens from time to time where maybe a son or a daughter is on title as like a second owner or something for a parent or for a relative. They don't currently live there. They really don't have any involvement in the property other than they're listed as an owner on title. So they ask, do they qualify? Unfortunately, because they are listed in the public record as being an owner on title for that property, regardless of their involvement, they would not qualify for the program. You can't have owned any real estate in the past year.
Great point. Once you're on a deed, you're technically considered an owner. So keep that in mind.
Right.
And this is the last question that comes up often. And after this question, I'll leave CJ with any final thoughts or any questions that he may have had in the recent past that he wants to bring up. But this last question says, I am recently divorced and the property was awarded to my spouse. However, I'm still on title. Do I qualify? Great question.
Yeah, that one comes up from time to time. It can be very tricky. And it's kind of a case-by-case situation. But generally speaking, what we say is that as long as you can provide a divorce decree showing that that property was awarded to your spouse, then you would qualify for that property. If you cannot provide that divorce decree, or that divorce decree shows that, or doesn't include that that the property was actually awarded to the other spouse, you would not qualify for the property. So you really have to have that divorce decree, and it has to specifically state that that property has been awarded to the other party, and you would qualify.
Awesome. So are there any time frames, like if the divorce happened less than a year ago, would they still qualify?
As long as, well, technically, good question. You almost caught me on that one. If the divorce has been within a year, and the decree shows that it's being awarded to that other party, and like I said, that's within that 1 year time frame, they would not qualify because before the divorce, they were still the owner of that property. So that divorce decree, awarding it to the other person, would have to be older than 1 year for them to qualify.
I see. Okay, so that's a great point there that you just made, because that is important to know, especially in an unfortunate situation where you do get into that situation of a divorce. So I appreciate that, yeah. Anything else you want to add, CJ, that I may not have brought up or don't remember? You're a wealth of knowledge on this topic and other topics with HUD, with that type of experience that you have, so feel free.
Well, the one thing I just want to convey again is that HUD puts out those GNND documents. They're very limited in nature, and they don't include the entire scope of what is required to qualify for the program. They're very clear-cut. They're very short. So many people have questions. A lot of things that we went over today, a buyer might challenge, saying that it's not on the form. But like I said, it's a HUD program, and it's up to HUD's interpretation of that program. BLB makes absolutely no interpretations of the program. All we do is enforce the HUD policy, the HUD interpretation. So sometimes, if you have a question, you can obviously call us, or you might be questioning whether you actually qualify for the program. A lot of times those things are very case specific. So we actually go through a screening process. So if you're awarded the property, we'll go through a screening process where we will review all the information. We'll actually call your employer. We'll call you to verify your employment. We will run a background investigation to see what type of properties you might own or be linked to, and any properties that you sold in the past and how long ago you sold them. So we will go through that screening process to try to qualify you for the property. Sometimes, unfortunately, we won't be able to qualify you. So, like I said, it's sometimes case specific, but we will go through that screening process. So if you're in doubt and you think you may qualify, but you're not able to call us and ask us questions before, it would probably be in your best interest, if you really do think you qualify for the program, go ahead and submit that bid if you're up against a bid deadline. That way we can go through the screening process and ask the appropriate questions to qualify you or disqualify you. The only other thing I'd like to go over is, again, that bidding system as far as what's online. I know, Ray, you showed them that, but we get a lot of questions on that as far as when they search for property. So that search up at the top, they'll search for the property, but they won't include that buyer type. And unfortunately, they'll think all of the properties are eligible for GNND programs. And we get a lot of cancellations where buyers have bid, they've been successful in winning the property, ultimately to cancel because they thought they were getting a 50% discount and they weren't. Lastly, the lottery itself. So lottery is just like a lottery. It's exactly what it means. It doesn't mean that the first person to bid will be awarded or the last person. Everyone has to bid the exact same price, which is the full price, and the system will choose a winner at random, just like a lottery. So they'll award based on a complete random system. And if that buyer, a lot of times we get questions as far as backup bidders. So maybe we have had 5 different GNND purchasers, and the first one cancels. No one will know where their ranking is. That's not public information, but typical questions are, will you award a backup? For GNND sales, they're different than our typical sales. Typically, we don't award backups. On GNNDs, we will award up to 2 backups if we have them. So if the first buyer cancels, we'll move on to the first backup. If that buyer cancels, we'll move on to 1 more backup. If that buyer happens to cancel or can't close, then the property will no longer be eligible for the GNND program. Once it gets relisted, it will be relisted to the general public, and the 50% discount would no longer apply. Once a property has cleared the lottery period, it's no longer eligible for the 50% discount.
I did not know that either. I will write that one down there, CJ. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'll make a note of that. That's a good point. So those were some extra, and going back to how it's chosen as far as lottery. So you're not standing behind a computer or sitting behind a computer and just looking at which name starts with a letter C or W or whatever and choosing that particular person, right?
Not at all.
Okay.
For those particular cases, we don't have control of it. The system is programmed to choose a winner at random. So it's all done electronically for those particular bids.
Correct. Well, that's great to know. CJ, again, I appreciate your time. I know your time is very valuable. And like I mentioned, CJ is a project manager for the states of California and Hawaii. But we are speaking, of course, for the areas that we cover, especially under the Santa Ana Homeownership Center, which are for the states of Arizona, California, Hawaii, Oregon, Alaska, and Washington. So those are the states that we can be confident in regards to what we spoke about and the guidelines and the Q&As that we did go through relate to those particular states. So if you're an agent or a buyer from any other state besides that, I would highly recommend to consult with the local homeownership center for HUD at that jurisdiction there, or the asset management company that handles your particular state with any other questions that you may have regarding this particular program. CJ, again, I thank you very much for joining in. It's been a great session we had today. Great knowledge. I learned a lot today, and I'm hoping that you took a lot of knowledge out of that and actually can put it into action and finding some buyers that may be eligible for this type of program. So I appreciate everybody's time for watching us. This is Ray Warda, Outreach and Marketing Director for BLB Resources. Leaving you guys. CJ, anything else you want to mention before you leave?
It's been my pleasure. Hope it was informative.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day and take care. Please contact us if you have any questions. Take care, folks.